Good afternoon out in the East Coast and good morning out in the West Coast, and everyone, good day. Welcome for today's important discussion on the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, the importance and the significance of the multicultural uh, home buying activity. I think in society today, we have clearly moving with each passing year, greater number of minority population, however you define it as being minority. So to be inclusive, to say we are all Americans, and all Americans have that dream of that home ownership, the American dream of home ownership. My name is Lawrence Yun, Chief Economist with National Association of Realtors. And I'm here to participate in this very important discussion. And following me, we will have a great panel to discuss further in depth about the importance of the multicultural aspect of the home buying. So let me first start with some important slide, which I think you will find quite striking as to how the society, American society, is steadily shifting. So bear with me as I upload the slide onto the screen. Hold 1 second. So let's look at the US population. As we know, we all completed our 2020 census information. So we see the history of the US population from 1900 all the way to the recent 2020. And based on census, what they are anticipating what the population will be over the next 3 decades. So steady increase. It looks like in 2020, 2021 period, population growth may be lighter than usual because of this terrible, ugly presence of COVID, but hopefully we are completely, fully back to normal life or some semblance of normal life in 2022, at least cross our fingers for it. If we look at the total US households, so household is not a population. Household could be a family, a size of 5, they are one household. It could be a single person living alone, that's another household. So if we look at the household by different racial and ethnicity, we see the following. So white being the predominant compared to other minority groups. If we put this on a pie chart, it looks like the following. So the white population making up 66% of the overall households, and then you see the minority groups break out. But interesting part is the following. This is the delta, not the delta variant, but I'm looking at the mathematical definition of delta, which is a change. What is the change from 2010 to 2020 in terms of household formation, new household? So let's hypothetically say if someone buys a home, they are a homeowner and they don't move anymore. So any new home sales are occurring from new household formation. So if that was the case, one would say over the past decade, it would be the Hispanic population who are dominant in terms of home buying, followed by Black Americans, and then Asian Americans, with white non-Hispanic population or household growth being the smallest. Now, thankfully in America, it's not the case of people who buy a home just stay put forever. People trade up, with each repeat purchase generally indicating a progress in life. So total home sales in America is still towards the white population, but you can clearly see the growth potential among the minority population. Now let's look at the foreign born. Right before this opening session, I had some discussion at the backstage about various background, and we said, well, we're all family of immigrants, and some came from Germany many years ago, other from Greece, and one from Philippines. Did you know that Philippines was part of US territory, just like Puerto Rico at one point, so part of America. So you see the foreign-born population, but if you look at 2019, I mean, 2020 data, we're still trying to process. A census is releasing data on a staggered basis. Some people may be shocked, wow, this is a large number, 45 million Americans who are foreign-born. But if we put it in percentage terms, what we find is that like in 1860, back then, we had a huge Irish immigration coming in. Then towards the late 1890s, we had the Germans coming into the US. And then in the early 1900s, many Italians came to the country representing the foreign-born population, then steadily declined. And I think for the current US population, we are remembering, say, 1960, 1970, 1980s, when the foreign-born population was relatively small. But today, even with large number of foreign-born population, you can say that the percentage is actually quite similar to what has happened from many years in the past American history. And consequently, if we look at the home buyers, which represent repeat buyers, not only the first-time buyers, right now it is the white population who make up 83% of all home purchases. Hispanic Latinos only making up 7% of all home purchases, even though you saw on the graph that the new household formation, it is the Hispanic population is seeing the strongest growth. And you see different breakout by different category. For example, people who are buying a home with children, well, Hispanic population represent 10%, a little larger percentage showing that there is a more population growth among the Hispanic population. The one other group is among the LGBTQ plus community. When I first started working at NAR in the year 2000, if one looked at the national poll, 1/3 of Americans supported same-sex marriage, 1/3 back in the year 2000. Well, the latest Gallup poll is saying 70% of Americans support same-sex marriage. So you see the shift in the viewpoints and the occurrence, and more people, in a sense, coming out as well. So people are saying roughly 5% of the Americans self-identify as being part of the LGBTQ community. And related to the home buying, what we are finding is almost similar to the overall population in terms of the actual home buying, or maybe one may say, slightly less at the 4%. Rather than at the 5%. So clearly, America is shifting. The degree of tolerance is increasing. And based on the household growth that has occurred and will occur in the upcoming years, it becomes ever more important to consider the unique dimension of the cultural, multicultural dimension of the potential buyers. So discuss all this in fuller detail, I want to introduce my colleague, Dr. Jessica Lautz, to discuss a little more in detail and also have other panelists join. So now I am going to turn it over to Dr. Jessica Lautz.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. Lawrence is an impossible person to follow, so super psyched to do that today. He really does bring the data and just makes such incredible points with that. I'm really excited that you're going to have two wonderful speakers here today who are going to go in depth, but just to open you up with a few facts of what NAR has collected. In 2001, when we looked just at the NAR membership, so we're backing out a little from home buyers and sellers and homeownership overall, when we just look at the NAR membership, what we can see is just 10% of the membership was non-white. Today, that number is 26%. It's more common when we look at younger members. It's more common when we look at people who are entering the field. So it is becoming more diverse. When we look at membership overall and we look at Asian Pacific Islander, they represent 6% of members. Again, higher representation if we look at younger members and at people who are new entering the field. Something that was pretty interesting this year that we did, which is a report that we dusted off, we hadn't done since 2017, was look at career choices. Why do people enter into real estate? We found that for Asian Pacific Islander members, they're more likely to enter for flexible work hours, interest in real estate, and working with people. And something that I think is very unique to this demographic is that they are one of the most likely demographics to actually start off in real estate. Most people in real estate, they jump from some other career choice. Only 6 or 7% of members traditionally start off in real estate, but for Asian Pacific Islanders, that actually rises to more than 20% of members are actually starting off in real estate as their first career. So I want to introduce Hope Atwell, who's the Executive Director of the Asian Real Estate Alliance Association of America. I know she's going to have a great presentation and go more in depth. So without further ado, here's Hope.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate the invitation and appreciate the time to go over some of the statistics and data about home ownership and about the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. So let us move on to the next slide, please. So for any of you who are interested in taking a look at in-depth, again, what's going on with our community as far as migration, as far as home ownership and all of that data, you can download our report. It's called the State of Asia America Report, and it's updated every year. We have the report on our website. So as you can see, you can go to aria.org to download the report. Next slide. So we've got a great partnership with Freddie Mac, and we're very grateful for the data that they continue to provide to us. So as you can see here, this is a map of where Asian Americans live, and typically, and we continue to, we live in bi-coastal communities and states. So as you can see in this heat map, the darker kind of like footprint, right? The darker orange represents where we're at. So we're typically, again, in the West Coast and the East Coast, right? So California, the Pacific Northwest, you take a look at Washington, D.C., New York, and New Jersey. What's interesting in this heat map is that you're going to see some dots kind of like on the south and also inward. And according to Freddie Mac's data, right, the migration patterns of our community is towards the south. And interestingly enough, when we were putting together this report, one of the things that we had found is that the South actually has more Asian American and Pacific Islanders now than the Northeast. That is a surprise for me. I've always thought that there are more Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the Northeast because of Boston and DC and New York, the school, the academics, right? But because of affordability, as you can see in this map right here, affordability and just where jobs are located, right? The migration patterns now within the last decade for Asian Americans are towards the South and also towards the Midwest. So for real estate practitioners that are in this webinar, that is certainly an opportunity. While we continue to be bi-coastal, we're not just bi-coastal now. And again, as you can see, affordability in San Francisco, right? I mean, the median home pricing in San Francisco is almost at $1 million. You take a look at LA and San Diego, again, it's getting to be not so affordable. You take a look at the median pricing in New Jersey and New York, you know, about 500,000 right there. And so you take a look at the opportunities for more affordable homes, and Texas, right? Places like Philadelphia, you're going to see a lot more Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders move towards these states. Next slide, please. So this next slide represents this is, I believe, hang on one second, let me just make sure, household income. So the median household income for Asian Americans is about $90,000, and it is about 35% higher than the national average. And the reason for why we broke this down by subcultures, right? You're going to see the Burmese, the Vietnamese, the Filipinos, and all of that stuff, is so that you can see disaggregated data. Because if we just present sort of like just a bucket of this is our median household income, it really doesn't tell the story of each of the subcultures. While subcultures such as the Asian Indian, the Indians, Asian Indians actually skew us higher on our median household income, you're going to see that there are communities, there are subcultures that are below the median household income. So while we definitely enjoy the successes of some of the subcultures, one of the things that we want to show in this particular graph right here is that there is a very diverse sort of like variation when it comes to household incomes. So next slide, please. This is, again, an interesting slide, which is broken down to subcultures. When you take a look at just the median house value that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders typically buy, we're at, I think, about $450,000, $500,000, right? So we typically skew on the higher end of homes, and there's a reason for that. One of the reasons is that we typically live in multi-generational households, meaning we live with our grandparents or an extended part of the family. Certainly, that was my experience. I lived with my grandparents growing up. So you will have a larger family beyond the nuclear family unit. And again, as you can see in the breakdown here, you're not just going, if we were just to present median house value of about $450,000, it's not going to really tell the whole story. And as you can see, the Taiwanese American skew on the higher range, probably because of just the wealth disparity within the subcultures that represents within the Asian American community. Next slide, please. Okay, so home ownership rate. We're very proud and pleased that last year we had reached, as a community, the Asian American and Pacific Islander community had reached 60% home ownership rate. And that means that here at ARIA, we're doing our job, right, which is to move the needle of home ownership for the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, to close the gap that exists between the non-Hispanic whites and also the Asian American community. And so last year, despite COVID, thanks to lower interest rates, we've seen homeownership rates just rise altogether. And we exceeded 60%. I believe it was the second quarter that we did reach about 62.5%. And this is very significant because no other rates other than the Hispanic non-whites have exceeded 60%. Again, disaggregated data tells the whole story, the narrative. If you take a look at the breakdown of subcultures, you're going to see the Vietnamese and the Taiwanese and the Filipino Americans skew higher on the home ownership rate. And again, there are explanations for that, because we tend to have more than two co-borrowers when it comes to buyers such as the Vietnamese and the Taiwanese and the Filipino Americans. So the buying power is actually greater when you've got two or three more of the co-borrowers when purchasing a home. And as you can see, again, the Laotian and other communities still need help. That's hovering between 30% to 40%, but at an average we are looking at about 58 to 60% home ownership rate for the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. Next slide, please. So we wanted to just share kind of like really quickly what are our barriers to becoming homeowners. Dr. Yuen had mentioned earlier about being foreign born. The Asian Americans, minus the Pacific Islander, 2/3 of our community are actually foreign born. And the growth of our community is actually propelled by immigration as opposed to birth rate. So it's not a surprise that one of the barriers to homeownership is language access, right? The inability to understand the mortgage documents and all of that stuff. For a lot of us who may understand English very, very well, it's already daunting and overwhelming to understand all of the disclosures and all of the documents that we have to sign, let alone someone who has English as a second language. That's why we're proponents of making sure that we've got translated materials. The other barrier to homeownership for our community is down payment. As you saw in one of the first slides, we live in high-priced markets, typically in coastal cities, right? LA, San Diego, San Francisco, you've got Seattle, right? Gateway cities, New York, DC, Boston. And because of that, down payment for more expensive cities can become a barrier. So that's one of the things that we have seen definitely, because it takes more time to build on a larger down payment. And then the third one is thin or lacking credit file. Because of our community being credit and debt averse, right? We come from cultures that encourage cash transactions, even in large transactions. I've certainly seen that with my parents. We don't have a really good way to score these individuals, especially for immigrants, right? Really new immigrants here, because they will continue to transact, right? Even with the purchase of a car or large, again, transactions. And so that has become problematic. So what are we doing as an organization to mitigate these challenges? So next slide, please. As you know, as mentioned, majority of Asian Americans are considered limited English proficient. And so we have been working with FHFA to translate a lot of the mortgage terminology and all of that stuff. And so a few years ago, they launched a website. Next slide, please. Sorry. They launched a website as a glossary of different terms that would be helpful in translating mortgage documents. And so right now it's translated into Spanish, Tagalog, Japanese, Vietnamese, and Chinese. And I think not Japanese, but I think I might have, it probably is Korean, not Japanese. So I will need to confirm that a little later. So that's one of the ways that we are able to mitigate this. Next slide. You know, I've mentioned earlier that because our population live in bi-coastal cities, you know, down payment. And so this is one of the things that we are working with a lot of lending institutions is how can we overlay with down payment assistance and such. And it's great to work with partners who are actually assisting our community when it comes to down payment assistance. Next slide, please. As you can see on this particular data and table, you know, you're going to see the different multicultural communities as it relates to credit report and all of that stuff. One interesting fact is that one of the reasons for denial for mortgage is because of a lack of credit report. So this is one of the things that we have been working with federal agencies on flexibilities for underwriting, and we're very pleased when the FHFA a couple of months ago announced that rental payment is now going to be considered with underwriting, right? So that's great, because as we all know, consistent rental payment is probably one of the biggest predictor of being able to pay your mortgage. So next slide. And I think that's just the FHFA announcement back in August regarding Fannie Mae's underwriting process. And I think the last slide is just our website. Again, it's great to be part of this presentation. And I believe Jessica, a little later on, will take Q&A. So thank you again. And we'll be back a little later.
Thank you so much, Hope. I'm excited for the Q&A later because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions about your presentation. One of the things that I think is really interesting at NAR is looking at the changing demographics of members. And Lawrence talked about just the changing perceptions and the opening up of society. And what we have seen is that LGBTQ plus members are actually a growing segment. And we know that because their years of experience are actually less than what we see for the typical membership. So we know that there is a growing segment, that we don't know the exact population. What I think is also really unique to this segment of the population is that they're really attracted to the field because of the love of homes and homeownership and wanting to work with people as well, which is very similar actually to the Asian Pacific Islander member that we see in real estate. What we also can see from our LGBTQ plus members, which I think is really interesting, is they're very attracted to commercial real estate. So if they're working in residential only, working in commercial, learning more information about it might be a bridge that they may be willing to go into as a future. So maybe a dual membership or dual brokerage and operating in both, or maybe transitioning over to commercial. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Ryan. This is great. I'm butchering your name already and I haven't even said it. So that's great. Ryan Wyden he's the CEO of the LGBTQ plus Real Estate Alliance. So I'm very sorry, Ryan, I can't get the words out. Okay, I'm turning it over.
Jessica, don't worry about it. I have a lot of years of hearing variations of my last name, so don't worry about it. And talk about impossible acts to follow. Dr. Yoon and you and Hope and now me. So I'll give it my best. I think before we dive in, it's important to identify that there's simply a lack of data, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I do want to call out NAR. NAR is one of the few non-academic organizations that is actually taking a step to collect data for the LGBTQ community. And we are greatly and deeply appreciative of that. As Jessica said, my name is Ryan Wyant. I do have a deck I'm going to try and share here. It should work out. Stephanie, can you see that on your screen? I'm looking at you. So
yep, you look great.
Perfect. Wonderful. All right, folks. So as I was introduced, my name is Ryan Wyant, the CEO, proud CEO of the LGBTQ plus Real Estate Alliance. I have been blessed to be in this position for a little over a year now. When our organization was founded in June of last year, 2020, there was a lot of behind the scenes work and grassroots effort to make sure that we were getting the proper checks and balances in place. Once we had elected a board of directors, that group offered me a CEO contract, and this has since become my full-time occupation. I'm grateful, and I wake up every morning looking forward to be able to do what I get to do. Currently, at last count, we're just a little bit over 1,700 members. So we're young, but we're growing aggressively. We opened up membership on October 1st of 2020, and we're currently serving the U.S., including all the territories, including Puerto Rico and Canada. We're made up of everyone in the community. And I just want to emphasize that plus at the end of the acronym on our name, that represents the letters that aren't in our name, but it also represents our allied community, our allies who are folks who identify as straight individuals that either feel empathy or understand why equality is so important, especially in housing for our community. They actually compose almost 15% of our membership. So we're extremely grateful for our allied folks as well. The alliances here really, we represent a need for education, advocacy, networking, and certainly to provide an ROI to our membership. Our membership is composed primarily of realtors and real estate professionals, about 72%, and then some of the ancillary companies, or I beg your pardon, professions that also make up the real estate industry. We do focus heavily on advocacy and education, which we'll get into some of that. And I'm excited to be able to talk a little bit about our report that we published in this past spring. It was a lot of work. And as I said, there isn't a lot of data out there that's widely available. So we did have to mine pretty intensely. And before diving in, for those of you playing at home with us this afternoon in this virtual world that we still live in, most of what I'll be touching on today is going to be available for you to grab on your own from our website. The stats, the facts, and the figures that we have used to compose this report are all found in there. And as I said, we did release this for public consumption in the spring. And again, I just want to note, this is a culmination of information largely based out of academia, but also with contributions from our friends at NAR and Freddie Mac, which was a huge source of data for both ARIA and us, and many of the like-minded organizations that represent diverse segments out there in real estate. So why do I keep saying that a lack of data matters? Because it impacts everything from government funding to tracking discrimination, to homeownership numbers, to tracking generational and community wealth within our community. The data is dependent on being able to identify a population. And if the population simply isn't out or isn't identifiable, it doesn't give us accurate measurements to relay when we're tracking things. I say that because obviously there is some data that we do know based on the population that is identifiable. And I would like to guide you through that with the time that I have left here. Currently, we represent very comparable numbers as the mainstream American population. I think this flow chart kind of gives you an overall idea of where the LGBTQ community is versus mainstream America. And when we say mainstream America, yes, that is the predominant majority, which is straight, Caucasian, and right now in the baby boomer generation from the data that we pulled. As you can see, the LGBTQ community isn't very far behind in identifying the same, what I like to call American dream goals that the rest of the United States works so very, very hard to achieve. I think it's interesting specifically to call out that we are a transient population and we do have very high rental numbers as opposed to home ownership numbers. Our rental population currently is 72% as opposed to, I beg your pardon, the number of folks who are renting who want to own homes is 72% versus 75%. So there is some appeal to that transient lifestyle. Just having the ability to move at your own discretion and to live in more urban areas, which offer different access and opportunities to folks in our community that are appealing, obviously. When we look at the home ownership rate specifically, we are far under the norm. We are sitting at 49% versus upwards of 65% for the general population. I say this because it represents a great opportunity for our community. Society obviously continues to be more and more welcoming, and as we continue to document higher and higher rates of folks self-identifying, Gallup actually just issued some fascinating numbers. Almost 16% of Generation Z, which is a generation underneath the millennial generation, now identifies as LGBTQ. And that population was born between 1997 and 2002. 9.1% of the millennial generation, about 3.8% of Gen X, and boomers come in at around 2%. The silent generation is, as you can imagine, around 1%. So it is a sharp increase on a generational overview of folks that are self-identifying or at least comfortable with identifying their identity and their sexual orientation. This matters. It matters because it represents what we're able to track from a home ownership perspective. So hopefully these numbers will grow as society continues to evolve, but it's also our mission, as Hope was saying with Aria's mission, it is our mission to continue to move that needle and increase home ownership within our community. When we talk about diversity within the LGBTQ community, we're really looking at the fabric of humanity. And UCLA's Williams Institute reported that our community really does lack opportunity for people of color. The population is represented currently by about 58% Caucasian, 21% Latinx or Latino, about 12% Black folks, and 2% Asian folks. The rest is a mix of indigenous and native populations that we have identified. And I say we as a community. Why do we talk about this? Well, obviously the LGBTQ community represents everyone. And if we don't have the proper representation in our professions, in our numbers, in our metrics, it's impossible to see how that translates out equally. As I stated earlier, Freddie Mac has found that there are some pretty significant reasons out there for folks in our community to purchase homes. Just like many, many reasons that folks in the mainstream population have, we're in pursuit of that American dream too. One of the bigger moments that has driven up the home ownership rate we saw in June of 2015 with a 5-4 vote in the Supreme Court in favor of Jim Obergefell, which legalized same-sex marriage in this country. Obviously, there are two main factors to driving financial decisions: stability in your personal and professional life, and comfortability. And this decision of the Supreme Court really, I don't want to say, kind of knighted our community, but it gave us the opportunity to use dual income. It gave us the opportunity to feel like we belong with our spouses and our partners in communities. And it was really the catalyst for change, I believe, in modern history for hopefully what we'll see is a rise in home ownership rates in our community. Marriage equality has helped, and 73% of all married folks in the LGBTQ population own homes, which is similar to 80% in the mainstream. So it does matter. I know I'm getting a little short on time here, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. We do have challenges just like everyone else. Freddie Mac identified, and we actually ran with it, that discrimination does impact our community as far as home ownership goes. And if you flow through the stem of logic, folks who are discriminated early on in school are sidetracked eventually from owning homes. Now, how does this impact home ownership, something that comes 20 to 30 years later from your experience as a youth? Well, if you're bullied in school, you typically take the focus off the academics. By taking your focus off academics, you're sidelined or sidetracked from achieving the grades you need to get into college, which impacts your ability to earn income, which impacts your ability to qualify and really purchase real estate. So there's definitely some data there that we have in our report, which does show a strong correlation between bullying and lower home ownership rates. And, the sad truth is that in 27 states in this country, it is still legal to discriminate against the LGBTQ population. It's hard to believe, especially if you live in one of those blue states, because state rights supersede federal rights where that is concerned. But today, in states that are not highlighted blue on this map, if a buyer wanted to purchase a home and a seller did not want to sell it purely because that couple or that individual was LGBTQ, they have rights to forfeit that contract without explanation. So it's a problem. And how do we remedy that? Through legislation. The Equality Act is currently sitting on the table right now. I don't think it's going to see the light of day in the Senate, but that's where it's stalled out. The Equality Act has been trying to pass through Congress since the 70s. The president has committed to signing that into legislation. This piece of legislation would rank gender identity and sexual orientation as federally protected classes in all walks of life, which obviously applies directly to what we do in the real estate industry. And it would give folks the opportunity to purchase real estate, to sell real estate, not to mention rent, shelter, and financing worry-free. There's a lot more data in the report, folks. I can get long-winded and I'm already over on my time. So with that, I'll throw it back to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Loved your presentation. Love the work that you all are doing. It's been a lot very quickly that you guys have really done. Hope, I'm going to start with you as a question, then I'm going to circle back to Ryan. Hope, your annual conference, it was last week. It was in person. That's incredible. How was it? What was the word on the ground? What's the optimism or concerns for 2022? Hopefully we're going to call it COVID Junior year. I saw that on Twitter yesterday. I'm stealing it. So how are things doing with your members?
Yeah, the conference went very well. It's a little bit, it was a little bit nerve-wracking to plan for an in-person conference. I think that we all thought that we would be further along with the vaccination and being in a state of normalcy, whatever that means, but it hasn't. But we felt that San Francisco, with their policy of being fully vaccinated, 14 days after your second dose was probably one of the safest places that you could have a conference, right? And we had a little bit of obviously some folks dropping off because of the vaccination requirements, but all in all, it went well. So thank you for asking. It's great to just see each other in person, and we intentionally wanted to keep it small just so it could be manageable, and it all worked well. So some of the things that we've heard from our members as far as challenges is, as we've seen in the news and we've heard even from, let's say, family and friends, is just the hate and the discrimination against our community, particularly the hate crimes that have impacted our elderly, the vulnerable within our community, the violence, right? Because of COVID, we're being blamed for this virus. And that impacts, obviously, our, the sense of security and living in a community where you think you're feeling safe, but the moment that you walk out, there's no sense of security. So that's one of the things that we've heard, and we continue to see, and we continue to sort of monitor. I mentioned earlier that our community has been migrating into the South and non-traditional MSAs for Asian Americans and Pacific Islander. And we're concerned that this might not continue just because, again, of the fear of moving into communities that do not have high density or large Asian American population, and the fear that is associated, will I be discriminated because I'm being blamed for COVID? So that's one. As far as challenges, conversely, because of the migration patterns of Asian Americans towards non-traditional MSAs, right? We just approved a chapter in Charlotte. A couple of years ago, we formed a chapter in Birmingham, and some of our attendees are probably scratching your head. Birmingham, what is in Alabama for Asian Americans, right? What is in Alabama in the Carolinas? And it's following the jobs. I didn't know that Kia and Toyota had moved a large manufacturing plant in Alabama. And so you follow then the footprint of these large car manufacturers, and obviously the population is going to follow that. You take a look at the Carolinas, again, because of schools, because of the affordability of the homes, because of the universities there and all of that stuff. That's where Asian Americans are flocking into. And then you take a look at the Pacific Islanders, the opportunities there, non-traditional MSAs again. You take a look at Utah because of the large number of the Mormons, right? A lot of NHPIs, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders, will affiliate themselves with the Mormon religion. And so you take a look at Arkansas, again, you follow sort of that footprint. And so for large brokerage firms right there, and thinking, okay, well, how can I prepare my brokerage firm or my office for these sort of migration patterns? Then, take a look at, we talked about during one of our sessions, take a look at where the footprint are for grocery stores that are Asian Americans, because if there is a grocery store that caters to Asian Americans, that there is a growing population of Asian Americans. So I'll stop right there, Jessica. That's a lot of information.
Well, that's good opportunities, though. It's good opportunities for members, both for residential real estate, but also for commercial real estate as well.
Mhm, mhm.
As shops and grocery stores and the like open up, um, that's great opportunity. Ryan, I did want to ask you. I read your piece. You had a great piece that you put in on Monday. It was National Coming Out Day, and you talked about that. I did want to ask because you were talking about how too. We don't know exact numbers. We don't know because of people's safety and concerns. And that's something that Hope touched on as well as safety. What would you say to members who are concerned about coming out either to clients or to fellow realtors?
Sure. Yeah. And, I love being on, I guess, the virtual stage with Hope. Specifically, she is a friend and someone I look up to with what I do. And I think it's important to just say that ARIA and the Alliance have engaged in a memorandum of understanding to work together to not just advocate for fair housing, but to combat discrimination aggressively. Because just as our community has many members of the AAPI community, ARIA has a lot of LGBTQ members as well. So we share a vested interest in fair housing. I think it's important to also recognize the work that NAR has done with the reform to the Code of Ethics and professional standards. And I would say even going a step above and really putting some protections in place in those states that I identified that don't have state or federal protections for members of NAR to feel good about who they are and not worry about, being discriminated on the job or harassed, I should say. So, it's important. As you said, it's important to keep in mind that we don't have accurate numbers. If we're using quick math with just the sheer volume of realtors that are out there, we estimate there are about 100,000 LGBTQ folks in the profession. Obviously, they're not all out, but if we're using simple math, and I believe the realtor population is a direct reflection of the general population in America. It's an incredibly diverse group. I think it's a realistic number. So why is that important? Well, there are plenty of studies out there that correlate happiness with success. And it's pretty hard to live a life parallel to who you are authentically and find true happiness. So there are studies that link, the ability to live as your genuine and authentic self in the workplace to a higher income achievement, to a higher sales drive. And these are not studies that we've done, obviously, but we've looked at them exhaustively, and I like to talk about them. So there's a business case for coming out. I'm not here to tell anyone that they need to come out of the closet or that they should defy what they've been doing their entire lives because today is the day. I don't think that's the case. I think people need to do it on their own time, but I think it's important that everyone understand and realize that society today has evolved from where it was 30, even 10 years ago. And we are now at a place where if you talk to youth, I don't want to say kids, if you talk to youth, folks in the Generation Z gap, it's wild to hear stories, everyday stories on how many people they can identify as transgender or LG or gay, or even bisexual. It's run-of-the-mill standard. And I think that in itself reflects a societal change. I'm not here to tell anyone that the way they live their life is or is not what it should be. It's a very personal decision. However, if someone does decide to come out, there are resources, there is support. The Alliance exists. I don't want to say as a shield, but definitely as a support group to make sure that folks who are not just LGBTQ, but also allied are all linked up and everyone understands that that network is real and is strong. It is a personal and professional network, and the support exists for folks that do feel like it's time to make that change in life. So, I would invite anyone on this call, if you have questions, as I said in the commentary that was published on Monday, if I can ever help anyone, even if it's just an ear, I am here and please reach out to me.
Thank you, Ryan. I think it's an incredibly important issue and something that, I hope as we do see more diversity, more coming out, more comfortable, living our authentic selves, that we do see that it's easier for everyone, really. So I have lots of questions here, and I'm happy to ask them all, but I do want audience, if you have questions, I will read them out loud for Ryan and Hope. You have two experts who are willing to chat, so please do throw them in the comment box. So Hope, you talked about multi-generational families. It's one of my favorite topics. I also grew up in a multi-generational home, so it has a special piece of my heart as well. Do you expect that share is going to go up as we see more Asian Pacific Islanders buying homes and the homeownership rate growing?
Yeah, for sure. Right. Based on Lawrence had talked about census data, right, that was collected last year. Based on census data, the projection for Asian Americans is we would double our population from 23 million to 46 million in 2060. That doesn't sound too far away, right? That's 40 years from now. And that's going to be propelled again by immigration, whether it's family-based or whether it's employment-based. We're going to see that number. And that's even with some of the immigration policies and laws changing, they're still predicting that. So we will certainly see that opportunity for multi-generational household continue to be in the increase, especially as, hopefully not so high with interest rates and all of that stuff. Definitely. Even if we're thinking of like first-time home buyers, you're going to see, within certain segments of the subcultures, families buying homes with extended family. Again, whether it's the grandparents or whether it's two families living in the home, then that way they can combine their incomes and afford a larger home. Expect to see that in the future as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Housing affordability is really cutting into individual household incomes, really breaking into that. So Ryan, I love that you brought up the Supreme Court decision in 2015. Our DC office is very close to the Supreme Court. So I remember personally running over to the Supreme Court with so many of my colleagues, and we were just out on the lawn in between the Capitol and the Supreme Court. And there was tears in everyone's eyes just at the enormity of that decision, that friends of ours didn't have to go and fly to specific states to get married and then wonder what happens on a federal level with those marriage certificates. It really did open a lot. All of that said, we all expected this summer of weddings, and it didn't necessarily happen. So what's your prediction? Is 2022 going to be the summer of weddings? Are we going to see more gay couples tying the knot, and we're going to have more homeownership, this big boom from that population?
Jessica, I think 2022 is going to be the summer of weddings for everyone because they haven't been able to do it for the last 2 years. Not just our community. I don't know. I can relate to what you're saying. So I'm broadcasting from the Twin Cities here in Minnesota, and Iowa, our neighbor to the south. Same-sex marriage was legal there as a state for a very long time, much sooner than the federal ruling. So in fact, my uncle was one of the folks that secretly drove down there and wed his partner with a marriage license that wasn't recognized by the state of Minnesota. So I lived that firsthand, and it was interesting. I don't know that you're going to have like an explosion in same-sex marriages this summer. I think we've been doing it. I think it's been happening, and for a lot of folks that have been in long-term relationships, especially in the Gen X and the Boomer generations, they're just quieter weddings. They've been together so long, and it's a conversation I've had so many times that white wedding that you picture, the extravagance that I had, and I'm okay saying it. I'm very blessed. My husband and I had a fabulous wedding on New Year's Eve, 2019, 2020, and then the world shut down 2 months later. I don't know that everyone sees that as something they want in the generations that have already been together for so long. Now, as a millennial, it was something that I wanted, that my husband wanted to do as a celebration. But we also didn't have to live a hidden life for decades. So I think it's the generational differences, as I'm sure Hope can attest in the AAPI community, the generational differences are phenomenal right now in any group, let alone mainstream America. I think, I have this theory that is for a completely different conference, that a lot of what divides us can be explained on generational levels. So I think you're just going to see a lot of marriages in 2022 anyhow.
Well, I'll get my dates ready and my pretty dresses to wear to all these weddings then. All right. So we're running down on time, but we have a few more questions. And folks, if you have questions, please do throw them in the chat. We're happy to ask them. So I want you both to talk about your organizations. Ryan, your organization is relatively new. You're relatively, I met you a few months ago and I was so super excited to meet you via Zoom. So do you want to talk about just the history of your organization? How can people get more involved? What are the benefits? Tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's cool that all of our organizations right now, and I mean that inclusively, there's the 6 major diversity organizations in real estate. We're all working together. And I don't remember the last time that has happened on a sweeping level. So there's some great opportunity right now, no matter who you are and where you think you belong. That being said, I will tell you that just because we specifically explain what that plus in the LGBTQ plus stands for, allies are welcome in every single community, in every single one of our organizations. And I'm sure Hope will join me in saying that, just as the LGBTQ community needs allies to be out and loud and proud, so does the AAPI community and the Black community and the Latin community, or Latino community, beg your pardon. No one's ever gotten to liberation, so to speak, to civil rights freedom, to fair housing freedom by themselves. It's taken movements that are bigger than our own groups. So we need that support. And I would say that is representative of the 15% of membership that we hold that identify as allies. If you want to get involved, our website up and running, www.realestatealliance.org, not .com. We are a 501c6 nonprofit organization sanctioned by the IRS. Important for me to call that out. And we're proud to be on the scene. We've got 52 thriving chapters throughout the country right now. We're launching 4 more, and we've been invited, and I say that strategically, to look at opening chapters in Latin America and Europe next year. So it's something that I never dreamed possible. We just literally turned the page into year 2. And this was something I thought, okay, we'll start thinking about that 5 years down the road. It's been a humbling experience. And I really do. I said it on the front side of this call. I look to my peers a lot, whether it's Hope or my friends over at NAREP, the Hispanic Association. It's important that I think that we're all moving the needle together. And I think, Hope, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I think the work that we've all tried to do intentionally, collaboratively over the last 12 months, I think it's really starting to impact things.
That's wonderful. Hope, I want you to brag. Please brag about your association. Tell us more. I've been to one of your national conferences, and it really did blow me away. It was a few years ago.
Yeah, sure. And I just want to echo what Ryan had said, right? It's a collaborative effort. Well, we have different multicultural organizations. At the end of the day, it's all about helping our community, right? Helping all Americans become homeowners. So it's great to work with Ryan and the Alliance as we support each other's mission. But ARIA was actually founded by, many of you know, John Long and Alan Okamoto, right? That was the genesis. And I want to say that the genesis of the discussion of forming an organization that supports Asian Americans was actually from meetings, I think, that Alan and John had attended from the diversity committee at NAR, right? They were talking to a lot of the members who said, listen, there's an organization that supports the Black community. There's an organization that supports the Hispanics. Why can't we have an organization that supports the Asian American community? And if you take a look at a lot of the real estate organizations from a state basis, we're very siloed, right? There's the Japanese organization, there's the Chinese organization, there's the Filipino organization. And what John and Alan wanted to do was to bring this all together and really identify each other, identify the organization as an organization that supports Asian Americans, right? And so one of the questions that we would commonly be asked is, well, do I have to be Asian? No, you don't, right? We're all, just like Ryan, we are all inclusive of whoever wants to support and understand serving the Asian American community, just because of the complexities of the subcultures. If you want to know, the differences of working with Vietnamese Americans and Filipino Americans or Chinese Americans, ARIA is the go-to. So we have 42 chapters, 2 including in Canada, 17,000 members, I think almost 18,000 members now. We've got a diverse membership from real estate practitioners to mortgage professionals to title companies and all of that stuff. So it's aria.org. I think it's /join, which you would be redirected to the registration page. And we'd love to see you at a future ARIA chapter event.
Awesome. So I know that our folks, Stephanie, threw the links, I believe, in the chat, so you guys can find out more information about joining each one, and finding out more information as well. It looks like there is a lot of compliments in here about not knowing exactly what people were walking into for the session, but they're truly in love with it. So thank you both so much. If you have parting words in like 1 second, what would you say? What's your parting words?
I would say, let's continue to work together. NAR obviously is in the forefront of a lot of what we fight for homeownership. Let's work together, as organizations, as Ryan had said, because it's all for a common mission, which is to increase homeownership for all Americans.
One of the largest, one of the greatest trades in the entire world, as far as I'm concerned. If the American real estate profession can figure this out, anyone can figure this out. And folks, we are figuring this out. And just by being here today, you're all included in that. So continue to push forward, continue to work with us, ARIA and the Alliance and the other organizations. And please continue to support NAR as well. Without NAR, Hope and I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ryan and Hope and Lawrence, so much. Truly, this has been a really great session, and I'm really excited to have been take part of it. So next up, do not miss November 3rd. There's going to be a conference preview. That's the next conference year-round session. You're not going to want to miss that one. So please do check it out. And it's also going to be on Facebook Live. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in today.